Good morning, folks. So, yesterday I shared with you video number 1 about beginning techniques in watercolors painting. And I told you there was 17 watercolor techniques I was going to share with you. And then I realized that there was actually 18. So that's where I got the number from this morning. And which sounds like a lot. We went through 7 of them yesterday. This is what the paper looked like yesterday when we left. And I told you that you could either do it on 2 smaller sheets of paper, depending on the size of paper you had at your house. And we had only worked on one, and we had gotten this far. Or if you had one big piece, we had worked on this, and we had folded it in half. So we were all working on the same size. And we had worked on 7 of them, and we had stopped there and let that dry overnight. Today, the 18th one that we'll work on today, we're actually going to be kind of working back with this spot. And we needed, for some of the techniques, we needed the paint to dry overnight. I'm Not only did I tell you that there was only 17 and we're going to be working with 18, I also told you to let this dry for about 20 minutes. Well, I wrote down the time here. It actually took me 41 minutes or so for this to really dry well enough for me to wipe the salt off of this section. If you remember, before we left yesterday, we had sprinkled salt over the wet paint, and the salt had chemical reaction with the paint, and it kind of makes a very cool texture, and it gives it like a crystallized effect with that. And I said sometimes we let it dry overnight, and sometimes that kind of makes it a little rough to rub the salt off, and it's still a little bit rough on there. Kind of sounds like sandpaper there. If you haven't rubbed the salt off, do that in a little while, or do that after this video. Be sure you do it over the trash can though, because it can get a little messy. Be careful though, because I used a thinner sheet of paper for a painting that I'm going to show you later. And because I wanted to try with different types of paper some of the techniques that we did today, just to see what will happen. And I noticed that when I was trying to rub off the salt on a thinner sheet of paper, it started to rip the paper. So you're going to have to be very gentle until you know how much pressure your paper can take. Okay? And it took a lot longer for the paint to dry than I thought. Over on here, the plastic wrap, you kind of just can wait till it kind of falls off. And I actually waited and just took it off when I rubbed off the salt. And that's kind of what the plastic wrap does. Kind of a cool effect. All right. Oh, and check this out. Remember when we were doing the wet on wet, and I said that this, originally when we did this, it kept the star shape, but as it dried, the paint kept bleeding into where it was wet, and now it has a much less, much less star shape there. So that's what happens. Wet on dry, you get more of the crispy effect, and you can keep control over it. But wet on dry, it definitely kept spreading where the paper was wet. So today we're going to work with some more effects here. I'm going to open up my paper here. If you have the long paper, go ahead and unfold it. If you have the smaller paper, you're going to get your second sheet, okay? And we're going to label these and work together. I told you yesterday you're going to need some different supplies today and some of the same. So let's talk about some of the supplies you're going to need today. Remember, you can always pause the video to gather these supplies up. Of course, you're going to need your paper from yesterday, the bigger sheet or 2 small sheets. You're going to need a pencil, all right? You're going to need your watercolor paints. I still have both of the paints. I have my Crayola brand here, and I have my Rose Art paint from yesterday. And again, I used it for a painting, and you can already start to see the bottom of this one. I have my designated paint cup here filled with clean water. I made sure to clean out my jar. My paintbrush from yesterday. Today I've got paper towels. I have crowns. Excuse me. Crayola crowns is what I like. I have a little bit of rubbing alcohol it'd be nice if you could see it, in a little container, little Tupperware containers. I've got the lid closed. I've got a couple of Q-tips. I have some different tape. Masking tape is fine. Painter's tape's the best, but painter's tape is a lot more expensive. And I also got regular, just plain old Scotch tape. I'm going to try all 3 just to see and experiment with it, because I know at home a lot of you may not have masking tape, and you probably don't have painter's tape. So we're going to try all 3. I just want to see what happens when we try all three. I think all three are going to work. I just think that these two might rip the paper a little more, but we're going to try it. I've used masking tape in my classroom just because painter's tape is quite more expensive, and sometimes that's all I have. You're also going to need I use an old toothbrush. I actually will go sometimes to the Everything's a Dollar store or Walmart and get the really cheap, the harder toothbrushes are the best. This one's actually kind of soft, but I'll get like they'll have specials where they'll have so many in a package for $1 because they're really cheap paintbrushes. But the stiffer the brushes, the better. Or I'll use old paintbrushes that maybe my students haven't cleaned as well. So an old toothbrush will work, or an old paintbrush. You also need some kind of stiffer paper. Cereal box might work. I just tore this off the oatmeal container. Great value. Apple cinnamon, one of my favorite. So I tore it up off the edges. I forgot to mention a pair of scissors. They're kind of optional. You can actually tear this too for today. A straw of some sort. A little piece of straw. I told you Q-tips, and I didn't mention toothpicks, but they're kind of optional. You can also use the end of your toothbrush, a pencil, or the end of your paintbrush as well. All right. I think I've mentioned all the supplies that you needed for today. A lot of times, part of a good, percentage of class time is just passing out everything that we need. Another option is to cover the top of your table or the area that you're working to make sure you don't make a mess, or having a paint shirt or an apron on. A lot of times in class, I'm wearing one. We are using watercolors, though. It is water-based paint, and it should not stain. I know yesterday when I got done painting, especially with the plastic, my hands had a little bit of paint on them, and I washed them off, and it was fine. All right, so let's get started on the areas that we're going to work with today. You hear paper rustling, it's because I try to keep notes to make sure I don't forget anything. All right, so for now, I'm going to go ahead and just fold this paper, even though we will be working on that side a little bit. All right, so we left off with number 7. Today, we're going to work on number 8. It's kind of a cool one. I'm going to put 8 right here, and it's going to be texture with, remember that's the with sign, rubbing alcohol. Now, I do suggest that you're just using rubbing alcohol like you would get from underneath your sink in your medicine cabinet. Well, it's underneath my bathroom sink. It might be in your medicine cabinet. And I do suggest that if you use this, you need very, very, very little. And I wouldn't use it straight out of the bottle. I wouldn't take my Q-tip and dip it in the bottle and keep dipping it back and forth in the bottle because you're contaminating your bottle. In my classroom, I actually pour not even, this is actually, it's a little hard to show you in the video, but this is quite a bit in here. This isn't actually not even how much I would give to a whole table of 4 students. I wouldn't even put that much in there because it evaporates very quickly and you don't need that much at all, okay? And I actually do not suggest that you open the lid until you're ready because it's got a lot of fumes and smells really bad. So don't open it yet. You're not ready for it. You just need very, very tiny bit, okay, for your project. So again, I would pour like a tiny, tiny bit in maybe in the very lid of it or in a small throwaway cup, like a little red Solo cup. Something you don't, or maybe take 2 or 3 Q-tips when you're ready and dip those in and then use those and never put them back into the bottle and put the lid straight back on it and put it up because you don't need it, okay? You don't want to dip it in the container, use it on the paint, and then re-dip it back in the bottle because then you're contaminating your whole bottle and you don't want that, all right? You don't want to spread germs. All right, so number 1, let's make sure our brush is clean from where we used it yesterday because we didn't talk about cleanup yesterday. I feel bad about that. We're going to talk about that again. So again, we're swishing, not scrubbing the bottom. Wiping along the edge of our paint cup. All right, I'm going to use some purple today. So I'm going to drip some water in there. I always get kids who want to take the cup and kind of pour it into the paint because they think it'll be faster. And It could be, but a lot of times you spill that water into a bunch of different paints, or you put way too much water in there, and then you're just wasting your paints and your money, or you're getting it spilled into other colors, and then the colors all run together and it just becomes a real mess. So I prefer you just kind of drip it into there. Now I'm stirring it up. Remember, ballerina, use your toes. Don't break your ankle. All right, stirring it, stirring it, stirring it. Oh, drip. All right. I didn't wet the paper because I don't want this paper to be too juicy wet. I do want to work kind of quickly though, because I do want the paint to stay moist, to stay wet. You do have to be careful about that. If this was a real painting, that there isn't a way to erase watercolor, okay? So if I was doing an official painting, there's no way to get rid of that droplets that I just made. Watercolor is transparent, which means you're going to see it. If I paint over that, it's still going to be transparent. It's still see-through. I can still see that when I paint over it. So if you make a mistake, you have to figure out how to turn it into a beautiful how to turn it into the painting that you're doing, okay? All right, while the painting is still wet, that is important. While the painting is still wet, all right, I'm going to open up my rubbing alcohol. I'm going to take a clean Q-tip, and I'm going to dip it in there and soak it in there real good. And then I'm going to press this down. And immediately you can see what's happening. All right, this is called a fisheye too. All right. And I'm going to kind of turn this over. This is why I don't want you to, that Q-tip's kind of big, so I'm going to try to squish it down a little bit. You know what? I just realized something. That is pressing through to the other side. I'm going to unfold that. And the reason why I remembered that is, look, it's pressing through to the other side. It's going to ruin my other paintings. I'm going to open that up. Some people I know would be like, oh no, you need to start over and erase those mistakes that you made. But I think it's important that you guys know that we make mistakes too. All right, it's called fisheyes, and it's important to do it while the paint is still wet. All right, as the paint dries, the fisheyes don't become as dominant. All right, and you can see it just magically occurring here. Look how fast that one went. I'm going to get a little bit closer to the camera. And they'll keep going for a little bit. The ones where the paint was really, really wet with a lot of alcohol are very much more dominant than the ones down here. These would be great for if you were doing a fisheye attack. I'm going to go ahead and put this right back on because the smell is pretty strong. Make sure I've sealed it all up. Okay. So that would be a really good effect for fisheyes. It'd be a really good effect if you were doing like an underwater scene and you wanted some bubbles. That might be kind of cool if you had, the blue and greens and purples of the water, and then you went back with the rubbing alcohol to make a bubbles. That would be really nice. What else could you use that for? So as you're doing these techniques, start thinking about if it reminds you of something, you can jot it down. Be thinking about it. Try to remind yourself of that as you're doing your painting. That way, when it comes time for you to do your own choice of paintings and you have to use so many techniques, you'll have some ideas. All right? If the texture, when you did the texture with the sol, if it made you think of rocks, maybe there's a way you can incorporate some of these images together and create your painting. It'll help you come up with your subject. All right, so this was texture with rubbing alcohol. Make sure you've sealed back up your rubbing alcohol or your smell, or if you're done with it, we are done with it for now, you could pause the video and go pour it out in your sink, pour some water down the drain afterwards and get rid of that, okay? Because you don't need it anymore for now. You could go ahead and throw away that Q-tip as well to get that strong smell away from you. All right, rubbing alcohol. It's pretty cool. Okay, let's go to box number 9. So we're going to come over here. We're actually going to separate this box into 2. Number 9 is going to be called Wax Resist. And resist means we're going to make the paper resist the paint, okay? And we're going to do that by using wax. All right, so one way that we're going to do this is we're going to use crayons. You can use any kind of crayons. I just happen to have Crayola crayons. They're my favorite. You can use any brand, though. All right, I just pulled out a crayon. I pulled out Crayola's Beautiful crayon. All right, and I just want you to draw just a simple shape, whatever kind of shape you want to draw. All right, I want you to draw a simple shape, just the outline of the shape. And then I want you to draw a shape and color it in, okay? You don't have to color super dark. You don't have to, try to break your crayon or anything. It just happens this is a nice dark color. I'm also going to get a white and show you what happens with a white. I'm just going to do now this is going to be kind of hard to see. Like I can't really tell. I'm coloring in the circle. And then I'm just going to do a regular just outline, I'm hoping. If I tilt my head a little bit, I can kind of see where the wax is. The wax in this crayon has oils in the wax, and that oils and the pigments are what give the crayon the color in it, okay? And in your science class, you will learn, or you've learned, that oil and water don't mix. And so the oils and these pigments in this wax are going to resist the water and the watercolors, okay? I'm also going to do a little experiment here just because I want to try it. I've never tried it before. And I've got some Crayola, just regular old color pencils, because I want to see what happens if we use color pencils. Color pencils also have wax in them for a pigment. So I've never tried it before. I just want to kind of see what happens and see how resistant they are to watercolors. Just in case I have students who don't have crayons, but maybe they have color pencils. I want to see if it will do just as good a job or an okay job. So I just want to take this moment here and try this out. Feel free to try it out too if you have both. Markers, the markers that I have are water-based, so they're not going to resist. I know that, so I just wanted to kind of see what would happen if I tried color pencils. I'm just going to make a note here. Color pencils. Crayons. All right, so let's see what happens here. Okay, so now I'm going to color over the top of this again. I'm going to just go ahead and use my purple because it's all nice and juicy pretty much already. I do need to add a little bit more. Got a lot of paint on the outside of my little container here too that I'm going to use up. All right, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint right over top of it. Now what's happening is my paint is trying to get away from where the crayon is. All right, that's what happens when I go over the white. You'll see it try to bubble up and then it like spreads away. It's going like this to get away from where the crayon is because it doesn't want to mix there because of the oil. All right, let's see what happens here. Pretty much resist there too. It doesn't want to, it definitely will let it show through. So if you do use, when you use your watercolors for a painting, if you're like, well, I like the way the watercolor spreads around, but I'm not getting a lot of good detail with that. And I know a lot of you don't necessarily like to use crayons, but you like to use color pencils, then you can use the color pencils for detail because they're still showing up. Got a little fingerprint there. They're still showing up in the color pencils. Check out how that white looks. That white crayon came out nice. So remember that, okay? You can do a wax resist with crayons and colored pencils. All right. So wax resist, the wax in the crayons and the wax in the colored pencils are resisting the water in the watercolors, okay? Wax resist. I like to use the crowns and the color pencils a lot of times too. Well, now I'm going to try the color pencils to give a detail to my paintings. If I've used a lot of the watercolors and some of the detail has gone away and I can't get a lot of good fine detail, I'll try to use the crowns to do that. All right, so down here now in this box, I'm going to actually break it apart again like this, divide it. In this box, I'm going to put number 2, and it doesn't matter that I've got these little blobs in here. And I'm going to call this one Tape Resist. And then in this box, number 11, I'm going to call it Stencil. All right. So in the first one, we're going to try to cover up part of the paper where we don't want paint to go. We want to use tape to resist part of the paper, okay? In my classroom, I usually would go around the room and I would just give my students a little piece of tape, okay? So I'm going to try a little piece of masking tape. You don't need a very big piece. I'm going to use a little bit smaller piece. You can use a little bit bigger piece than this if you'd like. You want to make sure you really push down the edges. I'm going to try the 3 different tapes. 1 to show you, and 2 just to do kind of a little bit of experiment here. Blue painter's tape. Blue painter's tape is the best because it's less likely to rip the paper, no matter what kind of paper you're using. It's also made to resist paint, okay? Masking tape is a better choice in that it's cheaper than the blue paint, the blue painter's tape, but it could potentially rip the paper. Scotch tape is a better choice for some of you because it may be the only tape you have in your house, but it's more likely to continue to stick to the paper and rip it because it's not made to protect paper and be, taken right back off the paper. It's supposed to stay stuck to the paper. So we're going to try all 3 here just to get it. I just want you to try one type of tape, whatever tape you have at your house, okay? And the goal is that as you paint around this tape, then after a few seconds, we don't want it to be so wet, but while the paint is still wet, a little bit wet, you're supposed to peel the tape off. And then, of course, where the tape is supposed to have resisted the paint and left the paper white in this case, okay? And you could do this where if you had a picture and you wanted the paper to stay white or you didn't want a certain area to get any paint on it, you could take the tape and you would tape it off, and you could like rip it and cut it and spend some time really, taking the tape in that little area and making sure that it stayed all crispy clean. I'm going to try some green this time. All right, dip in some green. All right. Make sure it's all juicy and ready to go. All right, I'm just going to paint right over top of it, right along the edges. Make sure I get all along there. Get a little more. Now I'm going over the blue printers. I'm going to spread this out because I don't need it to be too thick. All right, going over my masking tape, and I can tell where it is because the paint doesn't have any paper to stick to, so it's kind of doing like it did on the wax resist. It's kind of just trying to get off of it, find some place to go to absorb into. And I'm just kind of spreading it out so it'll dry just a little quicker. All right. I'm going to let that sit for just a second. Let's talk about number 11 for a second. All right, number 11 is a stencil, and it's kind of the same thing. In a stencil, what you're going to do is take a heavier piece of paper. It could be cardstock. It could be cardboard. But when I'm talking about cardboard, I'm talking like this thinner stuff. It could be like a manila folder, like a file folder. And if you don't have any scissors, it's okay. You can kind of rip it. The only thing is when you rip it, you get these more fuzzier edges, so paint might be easier to seep in there. Or you can use your scissors and you can cut it. And you can cut a simple shape or rip a little simple shape, or you can, get a little fancier here and cut out a shape, okay? I'm going to try, and you can do anything. It could be a leaf. It could be something really fancy, a dragon, whatever you want. I'm going to try both here because I just want to see what would happen if you didn't have a pair of scissors. So I just cut out a square and I ripped out kind of a square. So I want to try both and just kind of see what happens. All right. So you would put your stencil on your paper. I'm just going to go ahead and use my green up here. All right. And you would have to hold it down. Okay. I don't usually have a whole lot of luck with stencils. And you would just kind of paint around your edges. All right. And then you got to get it out of the way. Came out pretty good. All right. And then the one I kind of ripped. Wasn't a perfect square. Because again, I just wanted to see what would happen if you didn't have any scissors and you had to rip it. Would that make a difference if the edges were that kind of fuzzy-ish? Whoop. Came out pretty good. All right, now let's try to peel this tape. Still pretty wet though. Came out pretty clean. That was masking tape. I'm setting it over here to the side because this can be kind of messy. It's still got a lot of wet paint on it. Masking tape came out pretty clean. All right. Didn't rip my paper. Blue painter's tape. Nice and clean too. I'll wipe my fingers off because they're kind of wet. All right, here we go. Let's try the Scotch tape. Wow, much cleaner than I thought. I have to try that at school. It's a lot cheaper than the other tape I've been buying. All right, now make sure that gets in the trash because all of those are covered with wet paint. So, tape resist and stencils. And again, you could cut that stencil in any shape you wanted to. You could take the time to shape the tape in any way you want to and tape it down. And then you could paint around areas and hope that your idea is that the paint won't go underneath your tape or your stencils, and you would leave that area nice and clean and be able to paint all around it. Okay? So tape resist and stencils. Another technique that you can use in watercolor paintings. All right. So now we're going to come down here to this box, and we're going to separate it, and we're going to call this one number 12, glazing. And yes, I wrote my Z's like that. It's a little Z with a line through it. Okay? I learned how to do that in a math class. All right. She said that way it helped keep the 2's and the Z's apart, and it's just something I've always done afterwards. All right, so in glazing, what you're doing is, because watercolors do have that really cool technique of being transparent, when one color dries, you can put another color over top of it and you'll make new colors, okay? So it's not like when you have acrylic paints where you can mix two colors together to get a new third color. With glazing, you kind of use your eye to mix the colors. So what we're going to do is start this and then later come back to it as this color dries. So I'm just going to use one of the colors I already have wet. I'm going to use purple. And I just kind of want to put a light coat. I don't want to make it too, because I want it to dry while we're doing this. So I just put a streak on there and I'm just kind of pulling it down a little bit because I want it to be a thin coat of paint. I don't want to put a whole lot of paint on here because I really want it to dry pretty quickly. So I'm spreading this down. Just really trying to thin this out and spread it down so it'll dry pretty fast. All right, that's pretty thin. I'm just going to let that sit for now. Okay. All right, so we're going to come over here. Actually, we're going to come down here. And we're going to separate this box into half. All right, this is going to be number 13. This is going to be bruising. I have heard it called scratching too, bruising before, and then 14 is bruising after. Before and after, okay? And this is where you can use, sometimes I use toothpicks. You can also use paper clips sometimes, a pencil. I don't like using a pencil because a lot of times I'll get lead everywhere. The end of your paintbrush can work. Okay, so I'm cleaning my paintbrush and drying it off. So I don't want extra liquid. Okay, bruising before. So basically what you want is you're going to scratch your paper. Okay, so I'm going to lift this up here a little bit. You're going to scratch your paper. So I'm just going to make lines. And if you do this hard enough, you don't want to rip your paper, but you want to put scratches in this paper. So I'm making some diagonal lines, and I'm going to then like crisscross it. So cross hatching is what this is called, because you're making hatches in one way and then crossing it back in the other. I can also do that at the end of my paintbrush, but sometimes I don't like using the end of my paintbrush because if it's plastic or if it's painted wood, sometimes the color of what your brush is can go on there. But I'm going to go ahead and try that too, because as you can see, that's making lines too, in case you don't have a toothpick. All right, so I'm making some bruising or scratches in there. All right, and you can kind of feel it. You can kind of see it on the video too. Let me get a little bit closer for you here to see it. There's some texture scratches in there. Okay. All right, so bruising before. All right. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this area. I'm going to use orange. I haven't used any orange yet. Again, using my toes of my ballerina. And I'm going to paint, lightly paint. And what happens is the painting over top of this, the paint wants to gather into those lines that you scratched into the surface. And so you're going to see those lines show up a little bit darker than the surrounding area that stayed like on top of the paper. And because the paint wants to gather into those lines that you drew. So that gives your paper some texture. It's a way to put some texture into your artwork. It's a good way to put like scales. You can use it for making like a tree, bark on a tree. You could use it for putting texture into maybe a fence post. Anywhere you might want some texture. So you can kind of see it in there. All right, so that's before. Okay, I'm going to use the same color orange. And I'm going to go ahead and paint in this box over here, number 14. Just paint it regular. Spreading the paint out here. All right, now I'm going to go back and I'm going to scratch after or bruise the paper after. And I'm just going to do the cross hatching again with both my toothpick and my toothbrush, my paintbrush. You'll notice that my toothpick gives us skinnier lines and then my paintbrush gives me thicker lines. So that's something to keep in mind. You can get thicker and thinner lines. And then you can see bruising before and after. And we'll look at it again as the paint dries. It's much more apparent in the after than it is before. A lot of times when I'm doing, especially something that has a lot of texture like a tree trunk, I'll do it both ways. I'll do it before and after, and I'll do it with several layers of colors. I might use some orange, I might use brown, I might use a lot of black with water in it so that it looks more of a gray, maybe some green for my tree trunks. And that way I get some before texture and some after texture. So I can get a lot of colors in there. and a lot of texture. And instead of doing like a cross hatching, I might do more of a wiggle line. So it looks like bark. All right. Okay, let's go up and let's look at box number 12. Mine looks pretty dry. If yours isn't dry yet, you may need to wait in a little bit. I want to make sure my brush is nice and clean. All right, I'm still kind of seeing a little orange on it. Swish, 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 back and forth. Wipe the end of it. All right, I'm going to go to red. All right, and a lot of water. So I want it to be kind of a pinkishy red, light red. All right, and I just want to do one line down one end of it here. Kind of just want to do a strip down the purple here. And I want to go off the edge too. All right, and then I want to stop. And I want to let that dry. And hopefully, if we do this right, what I want you to see is that the red looks a certain color here, but then when it goes over the purple area, it looks a different color, okay? I want you to clean your brush really well, and then I want you to do the same thing we did with blue. This time, though, I don't want to keep going back and forth over that. Kind of defeats the purpose. So I want to really make sure that my blue is nice and juicy first. I think I didn't do that as well. I think that my red should have had a little more water in it. Really juicy. Make sure my brush is really loaded or has a lot of color and paint in it. All right. And this time I'm just going to really thick. All right. And stop. And I'll let that dry. And hopefully, again, that may be too much now, but hopefully what we're going to see is that this looks like this really nice blue, and that where the blue and purple are, we're going to see a third color, like a blue violet, and then same here, we're going to see like a red, and then like a reddish violet or pinky red violet. Okay, so we're going to see. Watercolor, that's another thing. With these Crayola brands and these Rose Arts, the red doesn't really look red. It's kind of a pinky color. Red, praying, if you want to get a more, like if you really want an intense red, you're going to want to get the more expensive brand. The praying is more intense, looks more red than a pink red. All right. Less water will also make it look more red. All right. All right, back to what we were working on. Okay, so we're going to let those dry. All right, we're going to come over here to some of my students' favorite ones. Not so for me because they are a lot more messier. All right, in this box, I've just split it into 3. Okay, 15, we're going to do splattering on dry. This one, 16, is going to be splattering on wet. You can tell from the tone of my voice how much fun these are. This last one down here, 17, is blowing. And then 18, we'll go back and do on the number 1 section. All right, so splattering is where we're going to use our old icky toothbrush or an old hard brush that has some hard, stiff bristles. Those are actually the best. Okay. When I say splattering, kids automatically get all excited and think they're going to get to fling their paintbrush every which way and get to cause a big mess. No, that is not the case. Okay, this is a controlled splattering. All right, this is controlled splattering. In fact, if I see any kid in my classroom not doing this correctly, or if I see anybody getting ready to get all crazy with it, I always tell them then they won't be able to do this. I won't allow them to do it, or I come by and I take the toothbrush away and say, I'm sorry, you've not earned the right to be able to do this, okay? So the first thing I do is make sure that whatever color I'm going to do is really juicy and ready to go. So my purple still has a lot of water in it, so I'm going to put just a little bit more in there and make sure it's ready to go. I'm also going to go ahead and get the blue next to it ready too. I'm just dripping waters into there. Water drops. All right. Now, splattering on dry, pretty simple, just like the wet on dry and wet on wet. Splattering on dry, the paper is dry, okay? So I'm just going to take my toothbrush, and your fingers are going to get dirty for those of you who don't like to get your fingers dirty. I'm just going to take my toothbrush and just kind of get it in that paint, all right? Just one color, all right? Just make sure my toothbrush really gets in there. Okay. And then I'm going to turn my toothbrush like this, facing down over the area I want to splatter. And because I'm right-handed, I'm using this hand. I'm going to use this finger, my pointer finger. And I'm going to hold the toothbrush tightly in my left hand. I'm going to take my right hand and hold it like this. And this finger is going to do the splattering. It's going to come down. Let me show you from the side. It's going to come down and it's going to like that. Okay? Like that. Over top of the paper. Just like that. All right? The good thing about splattering is it's really kind of cool. It's fun to do. All right? The bad thing about splattering is it pretty much goes everywhere, even though I'm trying to control it. It's all over here. I got a little on my table. I got a little bit over there. Excuse me. Okay? So I can wipe this off. I'm not that upset about it. However, if I was doing this magnificent painting and I'd really spent a lot of time drawing it and now it's all the way up here and that's not where I wanted it, I might be a little bit upset. Okay? So you do have to be careful when it comes to splattering. So even when I call it a controlled splattering, there's still going to be some fallout where it's going to go. Okay? All right. Now let's try splattering on wet. So this time I'm going to get the background wet. So I just put a little bit of water right here. This time I'm going to get purple. So because I don't want to mix up my colors, I've got to clean my toothbrush. Just like I do my paintbrush, swish it, swish it, swish it. Do like this. Then I'm going to use my paper towel. Oh, I still got blue. It's a lot harder to clean the toothbrushes too. That's another thing. My kids are like, oh, we got to clean the toothbrushes too? And I'm like, yeah. So a lot of times after they mess with this, you guys don't usually want to use it in your actual techniques. It's kind of fun to just, try it. Because you learn that you have to clean it up and take care of it and make sure you don't get it everywhere and you don't get it on the person sitting across from you's artwork and your neighbors. Or they don't get it on yours. All right, so got some purple in here. Now I'm going to try splattering on wet. Stick that in there. And it gets all over your fingers. And some of you cannot stand to have your fingers dirty. That's what your paper towel is there for too. Because I don't want you to run back and forth to the sink. All right, so the difference is, that you can see, is when you do splattering on dry, the circles pretty much stay intact. The little droplets stay intact. But the splattering on wet, you can see the circles start to spread out or bleed and will spread. And they'll keep spreading where they hit the wet paper. Okay? There where they didn't hit, like down in here where I couldn't control it, they're not going to spread. But right here where it's really concentrated and wet, they're still spreading. So that's the difference. Again, splattering on wet, splattering on dry. And again, look, it's everywhere. Okay. My glazing didn't really turn out that great. You don't really see two different colors. So, I am going to show you another example of glazing that I've done in the past. Check this out. This glazing right here, I did with one color of orange and yellow. And you can see how the color is transparent and how there's a third color there in the middle. It's kind of what I was trying to go for there. On ours, it didn't turn out as well. Okay, now let's talk about another favorite that kids have, is blowing. This is this last category down here, blowing. You need a straw. You don't have to have a whole straw. You can have just a piece of the straw. I usually give my kids just a little piece of it just to conserve the straws. Because once you use these go in the trash because I don't want to touch them. Okay. You got to clean our toothbrushes. Oh, mine still has a little purple in it. And you want to clean the backs too. Okay. All right. So for the straws, what we're doing is called blowing. And it's just simply what it is. You're going to blow through a straw. You're going to blow some paint. So the first thing that you do is you get a little paint. And you want a good juicy drop of paint. And you're going to just drop a paint Get some drops of paint. This is good for grass, weeds, seaweed. Okay, so you get some big juicy drops of paint. And you take your straw and you take a deep breath and you blow. Now, I always tell the kids before you start blowing, you need to swallow the spit that is in your mouth. Because if you start blowing and liquid comes out of the end of the straw, the spit comes out of the end of your straw, as gross as that sounds, that is not good for your artwork and it's gross and I don't want your spit on there, okay? So if you feel like you're having spit come out of the end of your straw, stop. All right, wipe your straw off, okay? Once you have that spread around, pretty good, you go back and you can get some more colors and add to it. This might be kind of cool for fireworks if you kind of did it in a circular motion. All right, I think it looks kind of cool for like seaweed, for underwater stuff. Oops, I dipped it in the wrong color, but I'm just going to go with it. I always get some kid who wants to blow so hard that they go, oh, I'm getting dizzy. I'm just dying. I'm going to pass out. And I'm always like, then stop. All right. Maybe you need more water mixed in with your paint. If your paint's not moving and you're blowing as hard as you can where you feel like you're going to get lightheaded, then number one, stop and take some deep breaths. And number two, add some more water to your paint and add some more paint to where you're trying to blow. Okay. But again, it's one of those things where you could get out of hand with it. It could end up going all crazy or it could look really, really cool. Another thing kids want to do is when they do have something cool, they want to bring me the paper and come and show it to me. Guys, if you pick this paper up and start leaning it one way, those drops are going to go and start dribbling down. Gravity's going to make them drip everywhere. So be careful about that too, okay? You need to leave your painting flat until it dry. That's pretty cool. Another thing I want to recommend though is let's say you wanted to do this and you wanted to make it an underwater scene and you wanted this to be seaweed and now you want to go back and paint the water blue. What's going to happen once you start painting this blue over top of this? This stuff is going to bleed in together. So consider that when you do your painting. You want to do the background first and then maybe do this stuff over top of the blue water or purple and green water or whatever you want to do. Okay? It came out pretty cool. And you want to let that water and that background stuff dry first before you do this. This would be cool with like weeds and greenery, and then you could paint flowers over top of it. It's kind of cool. All right. So that is blowing. That's pretty cool. All right. So now, very carefully, if you had your paper folded like I am, let's unfold it. If you had two different sheets, kind of lay that to the side. And I want to go back and work in this flat wash for number 18. Okay? Almost done. We're going to separate this into half. And then we're going to separate it into 3 sections like this. Make sure each section has a part of that wash in it. All right? Number 18 has 3 parts to it. The first part is all 3 of these are going to deal with what we call lifting. Number 18 is lifting. And in the first section, we're going to lift with what we call a thirsty brush. All right? Now I'm going to zoom in on this one. Just give it a minute and it will focus. Thirsty brush. The second section is going to be with a Q-tip. Lifting with a Q-tip. All right? And then the third section is going to be lifting with a paper towel. Okay? All right. So I'm going to get paper towel, clean Q-tip, not the one I used for rubbing alcohol. If you didn't use one end of your Q-tips for rubbing alcohol and it's still clean, go ahead and use that so you don't have to waste another Q-tip. But if you did, then you need to get a clean Q-tip. All right. So the first thing that you need is lifting is good if you need to lift off some of the paint. Okay. It won't erase all of your paint necessarily. It might. It might lift up enough of the paint to almost erase some of the paint. Sometimes it can lift up enough that you can put another color over it. It can work as an eraser. Sometimes it'll just lift up stuff to give you kind of a highlight, a lighter effect, a lighter color. Okay. So I wanted to show you this. Sometimes I use it if I make mistakes. A lot of times I use it for highlighted. Okay. So the first one is called lifting with like a thirsty brush. So basically you just take a brush, a clean brush. You want to make sure there's no color left in it. So make sure you check it on your paper towel. And with just a lot of water in it, you just take the brush and you just doing like this, nothing in the brush but water. And every once in a while I'm going to go like this because I'm taking off the paint. And as you can see, it's a little bit pink there. Now, depending on what kind of paper you have also determines how much of this you can lift off. Okay. This paper is not necessarily watercolor paper, even though it will take some wet medium, meaning it's thick enough it'll take some paintings. Okay. That's why I buy it for the classroom. But after a while, if I keep scrubbing, it'll start to lift some of the paper and rip it. So you have to be careful. If you have the cheaper sketch paper or the thinner sketch paper, it may not let you do too much of that. All right. But as you can see, I can lift up some of the paint. Okay. All right. Now that was with a thirsty brush. You can also lift with a Q-tip. All right. So again, I just took my Q-tip and dipped it in clean water. And I'm just, same thing. Now this one, I'm actually seeing like I'm ripping up more of the paper. It's like I'm getting these little, see these little fuzzy things? I'm ripping part of the paper, or it might be part of the Q-tip. You can also see that it's starting to come through on the back. And you can see the paper's getting thinner. So I have to be careful about that. All right. I use the drier part of the Q-tip to kind of soak up some of that. So lifting with a Q-tip. Okay. And the Q-tip away. And then you can also lift with a paper towel. So I'm going to take my paper towel. I'm going to kind of give me a little point to it, kind of like I did if I was shading. All right, so I'm just twisting the end of it and get it wet. Just dipped it in there, got a little wet. All right, and then, oops, this. I stuck my arm in the blowing. And I'm just going to and I need a little bigger space than that to kind of work. I can lift. I'm going to get a little wet. A little more wet. And again, that's peeling the paper up too. So again, you have to be careful with your paper. Let me use this paper towel to wipe off my elbow here. All right, so that is lifting, okay? Sometimes if you just want to lift just a little bit, you can just kind of, if the painting is still wet, like if you just did it, if you just dripped, you can do that. Like, for example, if you made a mistake, say I just went, oh no, I just dripped. Sometimes you can get the paper towel wet just a little bit. All right, find a little clean spot and you can get it wet. You can just kind of real quick, just try to dab at it just a little so you're not ripping the paper, and then just get it just enough to where maybe you can kind of hide it a little bit. Sometimes you just have to go with it. Maybe you accidentally dab somewhere else to go, oh, I meant to do that. Okay. All right, so these are 18 different techniques that I have given you on watercolor painting. Okay, we've labeled them all. You've done all of them. Hopefully, you've found some that you really enjoy. Found some that you might be able to use in your. Well, you're going to have to use some. Okay, there are such things as well too. I kind of wanted to introduce in here. We have such things called watercolor pencils that you can get. They're kind of expensive, so they're not something that I require my kids to do. Sometimes I'll bring in my own and let kids use them. Crayola makes a brand called watercolor pencils. And then I have a brand called Sargent. I'm not really sure where I got those. I think maybe they came in like a coloring book set, maybe. And then the really nice brand, but they're very expensive, is a Prismacolor set. Prismacolor is nice because they seem to have a little more wax. Okay. All three of these, you'll need a pencil sharpener, okay, to use them. But just to show you, these are not, again, not anything you have to have, but just to kind of show you what they are. They color like color pencils would, okay? But afterwards, you would just get a paintbrush with water and you can paint over them and they spread like watercolors would. So those are pretty cool. If you have any of those and ever wanted to try those out, that's something you could. But again, that's not a requirement. I just wanted to show you for those of you who had it. All right, don't forget to clean up, okay? Rinse this cup out, clean it out, rinse it out, clean it out. Don't forget to rinse out your brush. Make sure there's no paint left, all right? If you see any kind of color, it's not clean. Once you rinse it out, it needs to dry, but it needs to dry after you rinse it out. Do like this and make sure the hair, style the hair. You don't want the hair all spread out because if it dries like that, it's a lot harder to paint with, okay? So you want to style the hair, okay? Give it a little spiked do, all right? And then you want it to dry hair up, all right? Don't ever leave it in the cup hair down because then it dries like this. And again, it's really hard to paint with like that, all right? So style your brush, dry, let it dry hair up. If your paint looks like mine does right here, where it's kind of all out of the edges, all right, I would get a paper towel, just slightly damp, and you can kind of soak that up a little bit and kind of wipe it out. If it's really wet and juicy on here, you don't want to like pick it up and do like this where all the paint spills everywhere. If it's really messy, you can just kind of take your paper towel and just kind of wipe off the top there. If it's going to spill everywhere. If it's just a little bit and it's not in danger of spilling everywhere and you can leave it flat, just close it up and leave it alone. It will dry back out and you can still use that paint and you're not wasting any. But if it's spilling everywhere, then take a moment to just kind of soak it up. Okay? Make sure you throw away all your trash, your straw, your Q-tip, your used toothpicks. Make sure you don't put your rubbing alcohol back into the container. You don't need to contaminate it. Make sure you cleaned your toothbrush. All right. Throw away your little pieces of tape as well, okay? This you need to turn in for your grade if you're in my class and we're using this as an assignment. I'll hopefully have explained to you how you're going to do that. Turn this into me digitally or into class, and you will be using this to help you figure out how you're going to do your next painting. And then just real quick, show you this. I started this yesterday after we did those first 7 techniques. It is definitely not finished. It's a dragon statue that I have outside in a planting garden that I have. It's a little fairy garden I have. And I try to use some of the techniques that we did yesterday. Here he is. If you can see that, here he is. He's in a planter. He has these little gold rocks and stuff around him, and these little like plastic gems and stuff around him. I have to kind of tilt it a little bit so you can see it. You see my reflection? Anyways, so I drew him and then I was going to paint him and I wanted to use some of our techniques. So I tried to use, and I used different supplies than what I normally did because I wanted to practice just to see what other people might be using. So I used some paper that I bought at the Everything's a Dollar Store. And I used the Rose Art paints and some of the Crayola paints just to see. The Rose Art paint, the orange is actually kind of neon and their yellow is kind of an orangey color. I used the salt technique down here, and it did come out pretty good. But one thing I noticed is as I was rubbing the salt, I started ripping some of the paper. Yeah, there it is. Started ripping some of the paper. And actually, some of the salt was on the table while I was working. And so it made this kind of cool textured effect on the front. See how it looks all bumpy there? That's actually because there was salt on the back of my paper that I didn't realize it. And as I was doing this, I was creating texture rubbings. Kind of came out kind of cool. Kind of wish now I'd done that all over. But the paper kept ripping a little bit, so I had to be careful of that. So you need to be careful. Some of the salt accidentally got onto my dragon as I was painting him. That's why I've got these little speckles, but kind of okay with that. I had to layer the plastic wrap up. Originally, I was just going to do blue and purple, and it didn't work very well. It wouldn't show up, and I think it's because my plastic wrap was not real saran wrap. It was packaging. So then I decided to take the plastic wrap and I just painted it. I just put it in my hand and I just painted it red, and then I stuck it on there, squished it up, and then took like things like this and just did it like this. So kind of like weigh it down to keep it all scrunched up, and that worked a little bit better because you can see the plastic wrap on there. I'm not sure about the whole red thing, but the bad news is my hands were covered with red paint everywhere. But I've got to do some more with that a little bit. He needs some details. And this is supposed to be like a pile of gold. So he definitely needs some more details. I've got some work to do. But I originally used the flat wash in the back, and then I've used like a gradual wash to try to get it to turn into different colors. I used the different blues in both types of paint so that I could get different colors. I used the plastic wrap in the background here. I used the salt resist here. So I've used 3 techniques, 4 if you count the original flat raw wash, but then I covered it up with the gradual wash. So I've used 3 of our 7 techniques on there. Well, I also used wet on here, and then wet on dry on here. So there's 5 of our 7 original techniques. Okay, so I might try some more of our techniques today. Like maybe I'll do some bruising on him to help give me some of the scale looks. And I don't know. Maybe I'll do some blowing to give some like weed looks, because I'm trying to make it look like he's in this cave napping on his gold and diamonds and riches. So we'll see how that goes. All right, folks. Thank you for watching. Again, I can't wait to see how your watercolor techniques turned out. Hopefully your glazing looks better than my glazing. Bye, guys. I'll see you later.